Welcome to Season 5 of the Neurodiverse Voices podcast, the podcast that gives a voice to the neurodivergent community. My name is Andreia and I am your host. I am also the mum to a beautiful 9-year-old autistic daughter, and she is my world. At the age of 42, I was recently diagnosed with ADHD, and through my lived experience, I've developed a deep passion for all things neurodiversity. My daughter gave me purpose. My neurodivergence keeps the passion alive. By sharing my journey, I hope to help others feeling seen, understood, and less alone. Through conversations with guests from a wide range of backgrounds and perspectives, my aim is to challenge assumptions, spark curiosity, and enlighten all kinds of minds. This season brings another incredible lineup of guests, from comedians and writers to alternative provision leads, therapists, parent advocates, and researchers from the University of Oxford. Every guest has an inspiring journey and a powerful story to share. This is a space for honesty, connection, and celebration, where difference is not just accepted, but valued. Hi everyone, Andreia here from Neurodiverse Voices, and we are now on episode number 3 of season 5 of the Neurodiverse Voices podcast. I have another special guest that I haven't met in person yet, but hopefully one day we'll be able to do it if she comes to Oxford or if I go up north. And she's the founder of Sensory Mother. She's a teacher, a coach, and a mom to neurodivergent children. Welcome, Laura Ellis.
Thank you so much. It's lovely to be here.
And it's lovely to have you. So, Laura, you wear a lot of hats. I think we should start with you introducing yourself and tell us a bit more about Sensory Mother and the work that you do.
Thank you. Well, yes, I'm Laura Ellis, and I set Sensory Mother up because I reached burnout as a parent of a child with autism and ADHD. So, but at the time, he actually wasn't diagnosed. I was just struggling so much with everything that we were dealing with at home. And I hit burnout, and I was signed off work for a period of time. I was teaching at university at that point. And during that time, I thought I'll never be able to go back to work, and I'll need to start some kind of side hustle. And I thought I'd started to learn about sensory processing, and I could see how it was impacting my son, and I was trying to put new things in place. And so I set this Instagram account up, and it was just kind of looking at his sensory needs, and I was thinking maybe one day I can sell sensory aids or something like that. And that's where it all began, really. But I went on then to have an entire change of career. So basically, I have twin boys, and they've just turned 12, and when they started school, one of them started to find life very, very challenging. At that point, he was he'd gone into reception. There hadn't really been any kind of red flags, I'll say in inverted commas, there hadn't really been anything other than he was a very shy little boy, and he was always very close to me, but he was sociable, and he was learning, and he was speaking, and he was doing all the things that, were expected of him. But when he got to school, things started to change. And at that time, I was teaching in secondary school. So I worked as a secondary teacher for the start of my career. And so I had a very specific idea about behaviour management and discipline, and, how children should behave. And I was finding more and more that the behaviour I was living with in my own home was behaviour that I wouldn't accept in my own classroom and school. And it was very difficult for me to kind of think, how can this possibly be? I'm a teacher, I'm trained in behaviour management strategies. Why can't I make anything work with this, with my own child? And things just really got more and more difficult the longer he was at school. When he went into year one, the wheels completely fell off in year one, because of course he was expected to sit still for longer, and he was expected to learn in very rigid ways, and things became much more difficult for him. And so, so we kind of fast forward a few more years, and things just were horrendous, and I didn't know what was happening, and all along I was trying to treat everything as behaviour, and I was trying to fix the behaviour, and I felt a lot of shame that my child was behaving in this way, and I should have known better. I should have known how to deal with it. And I felt a lot of judgment from other people around me as well. And, you know, given the job I was doing, I felt like a failure as a mum, but I also felt as a professional failure. I felt like a failure as a teacher, because I should have been able to do this better. And so, you know, years of this went by, and our relationship was just falling to pieces, because I was trying to fix behaviour, and that really wasn't the right angle. But I didn't know any better, and I just kept going on that line. So we got to a point where things were just really bad, and I felt like we were going to have to separate as a family, because I couldn't live in this hostile environment that was our home. So basically, I hit rock bottom, and at that point, as you know, so often happens, we have to kind of hit rock bottom, and then we go, right, well, you know, where do we go from here? And so at that point, I realised we can't separate our family. There must be another way. There must be. And at that point, I then just threw myself into completely retraining, to learning. At that point, we had started to explore more about neurodivergence, and he was on the pathway, and he'd been referred to a number of different services. So I was starting to open my mind up to this idea that this might be what was going on. So basically, I fully retrained, and I went back into a new role at university, where I was then teaching around neurodivergence, and I was mentoring and coaching neurodivergent university students. And of course, all my lived experience at home was really helpful in working with those young adults and helping them to be able to put strategies in place. So I feel like I might have lost you when you're listening.
No, that's up.
We kind of hit rock bottom. I didn't know where I was headed. And then I made radical changes to how I was dealing with things. And that has then led to a whole new career for me. And I'm now helping parents to do the same. And, I'd love to think that I could help parents avoid the depths that I got to. So that I can help them to see that there are different things that we can do, actually, and they help the situation.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. That's very personal. And it's as you were speaking, I can't even imagine how difficult it must be to be a teacher, and the conflict that you've had being a teacher and a parent. But yeah, it's a very inspiring story, and it's crazy how many of us parents of neurodivergent children kind of have similar paths, isn't it? That, it's said that we have to hit rock bottom and have to go through so much and fight so much, but then there's always something positive coming out of it. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing. So in terms of lived experience, so you talk openly about survival mode. So I think you kind of mentioned a bit going to your burnout, but what did that look and felt for you as a parent?
Yeah, I think that survival mode, I think that half of the time, or most of the time, we don't actually realise that we are even in survival mode. I think we just get into kind of set routines and we just go through the motions and we just repeat. It feels like Groundhog Day every single day. We just go through these motions and we have these battles with our children constantly, and it feels so confusing and so frustrating, and we don't realize the toll it's taking on us until probably it's too late. And when we just get to a point where, I know with me, I just got to a point where I was just crying all of the time. I couldn't function, and I was somebody who functioned very effectively at work, and I was somebody who people would rely on to get things done, and I couldn't manage to do any of those things, and I didn't really realize why that was happening. It was just a state that I was in. So I think that survival mode really is just that we do. If we can reflect and think, I'm just going through the motions here and nothing is working, but I'm just carrying on doing those same things and I'm not making any changes. I think that's a really good reflection to have, to kind of just check in with ourselves and think, how am I actually feeling? I found myself that I was trying to isolate myself a lot more, and I'm quite a sociable person, and I was trying to find as many ways as I could to just be away from anybody else. I needed so much longer to be able to just think through what was happening. I couldn't deal with the noise of other people being around me. As I say, I was crying a lot. I'd be going to bed every night crying. I know my husband at one point phoned my mum, and I was upstairs crying after I'd tried to somehow get through the nighttime routine, and the house had been like a battlefield, and my husband was downstairs, and then he just appeared with his phone in the bedroom, and he just kind of passed it to me, and it was my mum. And there were so many mornings where literally, I say it all the time, I don't know what it was about the kitchen, but I think I'd escape downstairs, leave everything upstairs, I'd escape down to the kitchen, and my husband would pick me up off the kitchen floor. I'd just be in a heap, just crying on the kitchen floor before I'd even made a coffee. It just felt so overwhelming. And I think at that point I'd probably come out of survival mode. I don't think I was actually surviving at that point. But yeah, I think that we need to check in with ourselves. Things like when I say about isolation, I didn't want to meet my friends. I've got a lovely, really close circle of friends. I didn't want to go and meet them. There was no excitement for me to go and meet my friends. I didn't want to speak to people on the phone because I was just trying to really isolate myself. And now that I'm able to reflect on what was happening back then, now I'm in a great position to be able to notice those things when they start to happen and I start to feel a bit overwhelmed. I'm able to start noticing. Another thing was I wanted to just sleep all of the time. I just felt like I could close my eyes and go asleep wherever I was at any point of the day. I was so exhausted and overwhelmed, and it wasn't just that I hadn't had a good night's sleep, kind of tired. It was deep in my core, just needing to shut off and close everything down. So again, I notice those things if I'm finding myself getting really tired or feeling like, I could just go asleep now. It kind of triggers something for me now, and I check in with myself much more regularly to try and avoid that downward spiral. So I think that's what survival mode really kind of looked like for me. And as I say, I went beyond survival mode, and I really hope that other parents can catch themselves before they get to that point.
Yeah, it's very important to be mindful of ourselves. I think there's a bit of misconception that mindfulness is about meditating and doing breathing exercises. And I've learned last year that not really. It's about noticing. It's about being aware of how your body also reacts to certain situations. And I'm curious. So besides your family support and, you reflecting and getting out, hitting rock bottom and coming out of it, was there anything else that helped you like therapy or coaching? What helped to make you feel better?
Yeah, both of those things. I think I started to get some counselling myself to be able to, which then helped me to be able to identify what was happening to me and to be able to recognise those triggers for me. But I desperately needed some validation about what was happening. I wanted somebody to come and speak to me directly. I wanted to have a conversation with somebody. I wanted somebody to listen to what I was experiencing at home and say whatever. I thought somebody might say, you're doing this completely wrong, do this instead, or whatever it was. I just wanted somebody to help me to do something. So I started paying for various different coaches to kind of help me to understand what was going on with my son, what was going on at home. And of course, a huge part of that was simply validating my experience. It was so powerful having a professional say to me, this is not your fault. It landed so much, with so much more impact, because it wasn't, when I was saying it can't be my fault, but the voices in your head are telling you that it is your fault. And even some of the voices around the outside of you, particularly with my son and so many of the families that I work with, my son was fine in school, in inverted commas. He was fine in school. He was fine when he went to his grandparents' house. He was fine when he went for play dates to other people's houses.
Not just at home.
When I was reporting, people were saying, oh no, that doesn't happen with me. Oh no, none of that happens with me. And that just firms up that idea in your own mind that, well, obviously this is about me. This is because he doesn't have any respect for me. This is because my boundaries aren't firm enough. This is because I'm not parenting him in the right way. And it was so powerful to have somebody come to me, meet me personally and say, absolutely, this is not about you. Actually, what it is X, Y, and Z. And to give me some kind of professional knowledge and understanding about what actually was going on, that this wasn't about me, it was about him and how his brain was wired and how overwhelmed he was with life. And
in general,
what I was seeing was the kind of the effects of his overwhelm. So and
I bet it helped. I bet it helped to speak to someone who is completely outside the picture, someone who can be neutral, because when you are within the situation yourself, the perspective is not the same as if you are completely outside.
That's what I love to do. That's my favourite part of this job that I've now created for myself, is literally just sitting. I do a lot of work online and just sitting with a parent and talking about their situation and being able to validate their experience. And usually, in every single call that we have, I'm able to make things more clear for them, so I can help them to understand, what their child is actually communicating to them with their behaviour. And, it's never about fixing the child. It's about understanding what's going on so that we can fix the situation rather than the child, because the child isn't broken and the parent isn't broken. It's the situation that needs some adjusting and some support. And that's where now I feel, with my lived experience, and as I say, I went on to kind of retrain, and I was teaching master's level autism studies at university. So I've got kind of the academic professional background, but I've very much got that lived experience. So it's not about teaching people master's level work. It's about kind of helping them to understand what's actually going on, so that they can stop blaming themselves and stop just feeling completely hopeless and actually see, right, it's not quite so random. Actually, there are patterns here. There are things that we can look out for so that we can make changes which actually help. So that's what I absolutely love doing that now.
Yeah, because you've been there before, and you don't want other parents to go through the same. And what would you say were the most challenging moments for you as a parent during that time? Because managing you with the burnout, plus being a mom, being a wife as well, being a daughter, what were the most challenging times?
Yeah, so for me, the biggest challenges were the meltdowns. So they felt relentless. I was being told that my son was fine everywhere else, but as soon as he'd come home, or as soon as we get in the car outside school, or as soon as he was with me, he would just let rip. And so these meltdowns were shouting, screaming, hitting, throwing things, just really, he so distressed, distressing for both of us and for everybody else around us, because it would happen in front of his twin, and it would happen with my husband as well. So these meltdowns were just happening all of the time. And because I didn't understand what they were, what they meant, I just thought that he was choosing to do this. It was bad behaviour. And so I was challenging it all of the time. So as soon as he would start, I would challenge him. So I would be stepping in and trying to fix that behaviour and correct him and teach him how to do things differently. And then the teaching wouldn't work. That would make everything worse. So then I'd just get cross with him. And before we knew it, we would just be screaming and yelling at each other. And as somebody who generally, although by this point it was diminishing a little bit, but generally I do have quite a lot of self-respect. And so I wasn't willing to have my child speak to me in that way. That type of behaviour I wouldn't have accepted at school in my classroom. Mm-hmm. And I certainly wasn't willing to accept it from home. So that level of me correcting, it was just constant. I was just constantly trying to fix the behaviour, because that was all I knew, and that's what I thought was the right thing to do. I thought that every time I let him get away with the tiniest thing, that would mean that would make everything worse for us, that he was learning that he could speak to me in that way, and all of those things that we do when we focus on behaviour. And so for me, it just became this, I kind of had this zero tolerance attitude, that the minute the tiniest thing that he would do, I would be all over him, because I thought that I needed to stop it. I needed to teach him how to do things differently. Mm-hmm. And so we just got into this state where it was just constantly me leading with correction. And it wouldn't work. And so then I'd just lose the plot entirely. And then I'd just kind of, be screaming like a banshee most of the time. And so it felt like, to me, I was walking on eggshells. I simply couldn't be in my own home and just be in my own home. I couldn't look at him without something happening. I couldn't say a word to him. I couldn't ask him, which of his favourite chocolate bars he wanted. That would set him off. There were things that were setting him off that they didn't make any sense to me. So I thought that he was choosing to do it because he hated me. And of course, our relationship was just, over time, our relationship was just absolutely on the floor. I didn't want to be around him, and he didn't want to be around me. And as the default parent, the main parent, picking up after school and being the one at home while my husband was at work, it felt to me to be that main parent for him, but yet we couldn't stand each other, essentially. And I can kind of laugh about it now, because I have been able to, we have made a change, in our relationship now is really strong. I am his person. I know I am his person, and I'm proud to be his person, because I understand all of those things. And when I was spending my life walking on eggshells, not knowing when the next meltdown would come, not knowing how to deal with the meltdown when it did come, just living in constant fear, knowing that the next one was just around the corner, it was completely overwhelming. So that for me was what made everything so difficult. And the further we got into this journey, and the more it became apparent that there was something else going on, the more I knew as a good mum, I knew I needed to learn about autism. I needed to learn about ADHD, but I had no capacity to learn because I was so overwhelmed with what was going on. And this is what I want to do with parents. I want to just help to reduce that overwhelm for them. I don't want to teach them master's degrees. That's not what I'm interested in. I'm interested in teaching them small, bite-sized pieces of information that actually help them to start just being able to see things more clearly and start bringing more calm into their home. So that was really what inspired the whole of Sensory Mother, essentially, with what it's become now, was because when I had gone through all of this trial and error, when I'd started to bring in more kind of theory that I was learning, but then making it practically applicable in our lives, I was able to identify that when we got to a place where things were better for us, there were 5 specific things that had really helped us to get to where we were. And that's where I then created what is now my signature method, the pause method. These 5 simple steps that actually, if we can just focus on these 5 simple things, we can actually feel a little bit calmer. The meltdowns reduce in kind of ferocity, they reduce in frequency, and we can get to a place where we do actually feel like, okay, now I can learn some more things that I need to learn, or now I can start living my life beyond the meltdowns. So I created the pause method based on the things that had been most helpful to me. And you asked before about, how having outside help was actually helpful, because the pause method, it wasn't just about understanding my son, it was understanding me. And so the work that I'd done through therapy was really, there were certain parts of that were really actually very helpful for me in understanding how I was handling the situation or not handling the situation, the things that I was doing that really weren't helping, that I was then able to change when I became aware of it. So, out of the 5 steps, 3 of the steps actually are focusing on ourselves and what we can do to help ourselves, which then has an impact on our children.
Yeah, it's a ripple effect, isn't it? If you don't understand yourself, how are you going to be able to understand your child and and support them in that way. But yeah, I think it's very easy to confuse bad behavior with the meltdown. And I truly relate with the fear, the living in fear, the wanting to do certain things where there might be an overwhelm, but then and still doing them, but then getting home and being in fear that there's going to be a meltdown, because it's definitely not nice to see and to experience, because as a parent you feel helpless. You want to help your child because you hate seeing them in that status, but there's not much you can do. And I've also learned that, sometimes it's just best to leave them. It needs to come out, and it's going to come out in their safe space, which is home. And that's exactly what was happening with you. You was fine everywhere else, but then you were his safe haven. So as moms and the closest connection with them, we have to deal with it in a way. We just need to learn how to better deal with the situation.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think that's just so important that, at the height of when things were really bad, I knew that he wasn't fine in school. I knew that school was having a major impact on how he was feeling. Our mornings were absolutely horrendous, trying to get him into school in the morning, where it was unbelievably difficult. And, having 2 teachers, my husband's a teacher as well, having 2 teachers as parents, we are absolutely very kind of institutionalized that we do go to school, we have to go to school, there is no choice. And I said for many years, had he lived with a different family whose parents weren't teachers, he probably would have fallen into the school refuser category years before. But we had just, by the skin of our teeth, got him in. And when I look back, I wish that I hadn't done that. I wish that I hadn't put him through that, but I just didn't realise. But when things were when I was starting to realise how bad school was for him, I kind of went into very much maybe it was part of the denial phase of where I was going through, but I wanted to blame school. I wanted to take the blame off me, and I wanted to put all of the blame onto school. And really, when I started to learn what was going on, there was a lot going on in school that was overwhelming him. But there was also a lot going on at home that I could have managed very differently, that I wasn't managing differently. Yeah. And when it started to dawn on me, it was a really vulnerable kind of realization that I thought, oh, hang on, it's not all school, actually. There are more things that I can be doing to support him at home. I didn't realize that this thing was so difficult for him, and I could have done X, Y, and Z. So, understanding that there are things that we can put in place that help to reduce that overwhelm. But again, it's going back to that. We're not fixing the child. We're fixing the situation that they're in, whether that situation is school and changing certain things at school, or whether the situation is, the going out to a party at the weekend and changing certain elements of that situation, or whether it's changing the routines and the things that we do at home so that we accommodate the busy brain. We talk about his busy brain. That's the language that we use with him. And he knows he has a very busy brain. So he knows he needs longer, or certainly I now understand that he needs longer to prepare for different things that are going to be challenging for him. And he needs longer time to recover after those challenging times. And if we don't build in those time buffers into our daily routines and our weekly routines, if they don't become a priority for us, then we're never going to be able to break this cycle of overwhelm. And
in terms of sensory and understanding the child's nervous system, how does that play a role in supporting children? And your child in this case?
I think that is just the absolute fundamental shift that we need to make in our mind, that this is a nervous system response. And that is where the pause method it's an anagram. Is that the right word? Anagram? PAUSE. And the P is physiology, which sounds very academic and boring, but it's not. But the P is understanding what is actually happening in the body. Because for so many of our children, for our neurodivergent children, they are experiencing things that we can't see. And they're experiencing distress that we can't see. And I always kind of come back to the peanut allergy reaction kind of analogy. I always ask parents to think about that. Even if a child who had a peanut allergy, even if they ate a peanut and we felt they'd done it completely out of spite, they'd just eaten this peanut because they were being naughty or whatever, the reason for them eating a peanut wouldn't affect the way we dealt with the situation if they started to have an anaphylactic shock, which I appreciate is a very extreme thing to think about. I'm not dumbing that down. But what we're seeing with an anaphylactic shock is a nervous system reaction. It's a brain kind of sending signals around the body that things need to happen, and the brain and body are taking over in that situation. Now, if we were looking at a child in that situation, even if we thought they'd be naughty for eating the peanut, we would be able to put that aside and separate those feelings. We would want to help the child in that situation because we could see with our eyes, we could see how distressing that whole situation was for them. We wouldn't be cross with them. We wouldn't be going in saying, stop reacting like that, behave yourself and pull yourself together. We wouldn't do any of that. We would respond to them in the very best way that we possibly could, whether that was going to get an EpiPen for them, so we would provide something for them to use in the moment, whether it was phoning 999, whatever it was. Obviously, as I've said, it's a very extreme reaction. I don't mean to trigger any of your listeners.
But it's great. It's a great analogy. I had never thought about that. Yeah.
But of course, with our neurodivergent children, when they're in meltdown, we don't see any of that, or what we see is naughty, defiant behaviour, because it looks on the surface to be quite similar to that. But what that does to us is it makes us cross with them, and we respond with anger, and we say things like, calm down, stop behaving like that, how dare you speak to me like that. And what we're doing in that reaction, in that response, is we're exacerbating the whole situation, because we are not understanding that at that point their body has been flooded with hormones. It's actual science what is going on here. And so with the pause method, that's where we start. We look at that physiology, what is actually happening, because when we can break that down and understand what's going on, we can respond with more empathy. We approach the situation thinking, how can I help my child, instead of how can I stop this and how can I teach them to be better human beings. We don't do that. So I think that it's so important. It's the fundamental shift I think that we need to make, understanding the nervous system.
Definitely. And now let's talk a bit more in depth about the pause method. So what do the other letters stand for, and can we know more about it?
Oh, yes, thank you for letting me talk about the pause method. I'm really proud of it, and it's something that I've developed because these were the steps that were most helpful to me, and I want to share them with parents. It's about having something repeatable and memorable that we can come back to, that help us in the moment. Like I've said, it's not about learning master's level autism and ADHD. It's not about that. It's about something very simple, very concrete that we can use every day to help us to manage these meltdowns. So it is 5 steps. I say 5 steps to a calmer, more connected home. And the P is for physiology. So we look at what's going on in the child's nervous system, and most importantly, how we can respond more like as if we were responding to the peanut allergy reaction. So I give, again, another mini framework, a PEA framework in there, so that we can, in the moment, we can just go, right, what is it that I need to do now? And I have got visuals to go with it to remind parents of each of the steps, because it's so difficult to think when you're in these moments. So I just wanted something really memorable that parents could go, right, pause. I just need to remember the one word, pause. What do I do first? So P is physiology. A is awareness, and that's really where we apply that awareness of physiology to ourselves, understanding our own nervous system and understanding how we are reacting and why we are reacting the way we react. And importantly, what can we do to just calm our own nervous system down so that we can be what our child needs to be. So that's the A. The U is about recognizing the unhelpful thoughts that we have in our own mind. So very often we don't respond to what's happening in the moment. We actually respond to what we are predicting might happen in 10 years' time if we don't stop this problem right now. And that isn't helpful to us in the moment of meltdown. So the U is about really catching those unhelpful thoughts and trying to replace them with something more helpful in the moment. So kind of a mantra really that we give ourselves that helps. Then we go on to the S, which we start to get very practical in the S stage. So S is for stress and demands, understanding really what stress and demands look like for our neurodivergent children, what makes things difficult for them, and importantly, why on some days are certain things really difficult, but yet on other days they're not really difficult, because that can cause so much frustration for us when, you know, we ask them to do a simple task like go and get dressed, and one day they can go and get dressed absolutely fine, and we know that they've got the skills to be able to do that. So on the next day when they start having a meltdown because they don't want to get dressed, we think, yeah, I know you can get dressed. Now you're just being difficult. Now you just, no, go and get dressed. And we start to build that meltdown again. So that's the S, really looking at what makes things difficult and why it's so changeable. And then the final step, which I think it's so important that we recognise, that the P, A, U and the S are all about connecting with our children. They're about understanding what's going on underneath the surface for them and for us. And we need to connect. Before we do any correcting, we need to connect. So we need to get out of that mindset of fixing the behaviour, and we need to get into understanding what's going on and really being there with our child, connecting with them the way they need. But the E is the final step, because many parents like us, professional parents, we want to do a good job. We understand that our role is to help these young children become adults who live healthy and happy lives. And so the E is about establishing boundaries, because for so many of us, we feel this huge pressure to not give in and not be too soft and not let them get away with this behaviour. And that is important. It is important that they understand that they can't just go around the house yelling at everyone or throwing things and hitting their siblings and all of those kinds of things. But we have to understand how to do that in the right way for our children. If we still try and set those boundaries the way our friends down the road are doing with their children, it's never going to work. So the E is for establishing boundaries. So it's about how we can reconnect with our children after the meltdown, how we can help them to be able to move beyond the meltdown, and how we can teach them in ways that actually work for them. So, many parents come to me, and I know I felt like there was a period of time where I thought, this is just it now for the rest of my life. I just have to live in this war zone every single day. This is just it. And I want parents to know that it's not it. But first we have to connect with our children. We have to understand what's going on, and we have to be what they need in the moment of meltdown. And then, yes, we can look to set boundaries and have consequences. Lots of parents come to me and say, but they need to have a consequence. They can't just behave like this. And I understand that is important for many, many people. And I do believe that we do need to help our children to be able to grow and move on. But we have to do it in the right way. If we just try and set consequences and send them on the naughty step like other families do without, and it's really effective for those children, we're never going to move forward. So that E is the final step. So we lead with connection in the first 4 steps, and then we look at ways to correct. And I say in inverted commas because I do believe that connection is the most important. But yes, there are ways that we can move beyond the meltdowns and set some boundaries in our home that make everybody feel safe, because it's not just our children who feel unsafe with this meltdown cycle, it's us as well, and it's their siblings, and it's the other family members. So we finish with E for established boundaries. And it's literally the pause method. I've tried to make it as accessible as possible, so it's 5 simple short videos. So there's 1 video per step. Each video is under 15 minutes, and it's just a way for me to kind of provide a little bit of a coaching call, but it's completely on demand, because many of us can't turn up live to a coaching call. Many of us need this kind of help when we're at 11 o'clock at night, when we're lying in bed and we're thinking, well, what have I done today? How can I make tomorrow better? So the pause method is completely on demand for parents, and there's a workbook to go through, to go alongside it, so you can make notes and you can really personalize each of the steps so that they work for you and for your child. So
that's brilliant.
What the pause method is.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Well done. Yeah, that's amazing. And I relate. I think I do a bit of that unconsciously, just with self-learning as well. But yeah, I think it can benefit many parents for sure. And have you seen any shifts in the parents you see and you support? Of course, without disclosing anything that's confidential, but do you have any a success case of someone who used the pause method?
Yeah, I think that because I also offer coaching as well, if people want to add coaching into the pause method, so they can do that kind of however best suits them. But I think the major feedback that I've had from everybody who's accessed the pause method is just how simple it is, how having me talk to them about my situation and about what's going on, they're able to say, you know, people come back and say things like, oh my gosh, I feel like you're in my home, Laura. And they just find it really helpful because, you know, even in that very first video, which is, I think it's 10 minutes long, in that very first video, just understanding and making that shift in your mind that this is not a choice. This is a nervous system in complete overwhelm. And just having me as a professional and somebody who has lived this, having me tell them and to break it down for them really simply, helps them just in that first session to just deal with the very next meltdown in a different way. And it gives them something to anchor onto. So even in that very first 10-minute session, and I say to parents, you know, they can binge the whole thing in one go if they want. You know, each of the videos is really short, but I think that it's a great idea to kind of just take one step at a time. Do the first step and, you know, watch it back a few times. You can watch it back as many times as you want, but kind of look at that first step and just keep remembering, okay, we're looking at P, it's P. I'm just remembering P at the moment. And when P feels like, okay, I'm kind of getting this now, then let's add in A. And then let's add in U. Yep. So, parents work at it at their own pace. But the major feedback I get is that it's just so simple. And I explain things in ways that really just are helpful for families, and they see this reduction in the meltdowns because straight away when we approach it kind of with this idea of let's get the child an EpiPen rather than let's tell them off about it, in that very first mindset shift, we see that the meltdown actually, the very next meltdown just doesn't kind of bubble the way previous meltdowns do. So straight away we can see, oh, actually, by implementing that P, I can see that this meltdown was just slightly less ferocious. It lasted slightly less time. And, you know, the more times that we can do that, because let's face it, you know, I'm not selling a magic wand. And I say that all the time, you know, this isn't a magic wand. We understand as parents that this is hard, that we do need to learn some things. We do need to learn about what's going on so that we can do things differently. It does take effort for us to be able to do that. None of us can just magically make this go away. It's part of our lives and we have to find a way to manage it. But for every meltdown that is just slightly less distressing, then the overwhelm becomes slightly less. So then when the next meltdown happens, it's coming from a slightly lower baseline. And so what we see is this kind of cumulative effect. When we can just reduce the ferocity and the length and the frequency of all of the meltdowns that happen, then over time and over like a short period of time, when we realize, when we're no longer exacerbating the whole thing, over a short period of time, we can just feel like, okay, everyone can just breathe a little bit more in between these meltdowns. And that's when we can then have the capacity to maybe learn a little bit more, maybe do a little bit more and, you know, get some coaching or look at some new books that we want to read, or maybe we've got the capacity to think about what kinds of other help might my child need. Are there certain kind of therapies that might be really useful for them? Those kinds of things. So it's just about trying to just get some breathing space. And that's what pause is all about.
Yeah. And it just reinforced something that I truly believe in, is that sometimes we overcomplicate things because we don't have the headspace to think. But most of the times it's the simple things like pause, which is a very simple framework, that help us the most, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Great. So I will link your website so that, you know, people can have a look at it anyway. And hopefully you'll have some other parents contacting you about it. So now going a bit back to the shame and or this attitude that, you know, when you are in that denial phase and you or in the phase of not understanding. So you spoke about replacing shouting, shame, and confusion with calm and connection. Why do you feel that shame is such a big part of our parenting experience?
Yeah, I just think that it's just so ingrained into us that, you know, we bring these children into the world and we give them all our love and we want them to just be lovely humans. And we have this idea in our mind about what that's going to look like. And for some of us, it just doesn't look like that. And especially, you know, when I'm working with, well, I mean, let's face it, all of the parents who are listening to your podcast and all of the parents who connect with me through Instagram or wherever, these are all parents who are wanting to do something different. They are wanting to be good parents. And so when we have this idea in our mind about what a good parent is, anything that, of course, a good parent, really, we see good parenting until we understand it properly. What we see is the outcome. So good parenting equals a good child. And so we can't separate those two things. We can't think that you can be a good parent, but yet your child is doing X, Y, and Z. It can't possibly be. It can't possibly be good parenting if your child is doing that. So I think we just have this idea in our mind, those of us who do want to read the books and those of us who do want to go to the parenting classes and those of us who do want to go and join all the clubs for our children. We just have this really clear idea in our mind about what everything should look like. And so there's so much judgment that we just turn on ourselves when things don't look like that. And especially for so many of us will have certain parenting experiences ourselves, as in how we were parented. So I was brought up by two professional people who were lovely parents, and we had kind of just a lovely, idyllic, middle-class upbringing, all of that kind of stuff. But I was a particular type of person. I was quite reserved as a child. I was very shy. I was very compliant. I was quite, I did okay at school. I got on with people, had friends, all of those things. I was quite an easy child, to be honest, to raise. And I'm sure that my mum and dad had a huge influence on me. But I felt like, well, I need to parent the same way that they parented. And I really wasn't allowing for the difference in the fact that I wasn't parenting me. I was parenting a different human being with different genetics, had come from a different gene pool. And I think a lot of the time we think that if we have had a good upbringing, that what we consider to be a good upbringing, we just automatically credit our parents for all of that. And we don't really think about the part that we actually played ourselves in that experience. And I wasn't parenting me. I was parenting a very different human being, which meant that the strategies that my mum and dad used with me, they just didn't work with my son, because he wasn't me. He was a different human being. But until we kind of realised that, we just kind of go, this is the way that we do it. And then you have the complete opposite side of that as well. Lots of parents who've been brought up, who've come from backgrounds where they absolutely do not want to recreate what happened there. So they have a kind of a completely different idea, and they think, there was so much shouting and maybe there was aggression and horrible relationships in the house that they brought up in. So therefore, they absolutely will not have that in their house. And instead of thinking about the fact that there are just different dynamics in this house, there's just different people who are in this house making up this family, they automatically just blame themselves, and they think, well, it's obviously me, because it's obviously the way I was brought up and I'm obviously doing something wrong. So I just think it's, we don't really ever think about that. We don't ever think about the fact that everybody's experience is completely different. We're dealing with different human beings all of the time in every family. And it's something really to think about, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And how do you support parents who come to you with this feeling of shame and guilt?
I think a lot of it is validation, and I love that part of what I do. You know, I started doing these parent support groups. I started doing them at work. I started doing them in local schools, and I think the biggest thing, the most effective thing for so many of us who are feeling lost and isolated, is just being with somebody who understands. You know, whether it's one single person on a Zoom call or whether it's a group of 100 people in a community centre, whatever it is, feeling like other people understand what we're going through. I think that is so empowering, because that's almost the first shift that we get in our mind, where we think, this isn't me, I'm not the only person. There was a local support group close to me that I went to, and it was a 2-hour support group, like a little coffee morning. And the first time I went, I spent the full 2 hours just sitting and crying. And I think that it was a combination of, one, feeling finally I'm in a room with other people who are going through what I'm going through. These people get it. I'm not making this up. But I think there was another part of it where I felt it maybe a bit hopeless, because I thought, well, this is it now for life. I just have to keep coming to these events and sitting and crying for 2 hours. So I think that first one for me, it was so validating, but also it was a little bit like, oh, crikey, is this it now? Is this what my life has become? And of course, that's not the case, because the very next week when I went back to that same coffee morning, I went with a completely different outlook. I thought, I can't wait to get back into that room with other people who know what I'm going through. Because when we can connect with other people who get it, it's just a weight off our shoulders. We no longer feel like we're isolated in this. We no longer feel like everybody's judging me, because we know that at least those people in that room, or that one person on the Zoom call, at least they're not judging us. And I just think it helps to validate. So that's one of the very first things that I do. At every single coaching call, or every time I meet a new person, I aim to, or anytime anybody sends me a DM or whatever it is that we do on Instagram, I just want them to feel like they're not alone and it's not their fault. And
yeah, absolutely. I totally relate to that. I think it wasn't until I went to the first coffee morning as a parent that I opened my mind, and I felt a lot more validated, and I stopped being in denial. So for me, it was life-changing. And then I also had the chance to meet the first autistic adult who I've met in my life, and that gave me a lot of hope. If that's Dee, who collaborates a lot with me. She's the founder of Autism Champion. Sorry, you might have seen on social media, and she gave me so much hope. Just being herself, and I started thinking, okay, my daughter she can be cool like that one day.
Absolutely.
Because
I think that is a really good point, because as I say, when I kind of changed my whole career, I started mentoring students at university. So these are students who many of them were late diagnosed, so they weren't going through the phases that my son was going through at the time. They'd been through those, but they hadn't received any kind of diagnosis or any kind of validation until they were much older. And I was, obviously they were university students, so they were people who had gone through the school system. They had somehow managed to do that, but it had built up so much they were struggling so much with low self-esteem, because for their whole lives they'd felt like they were just different to everyone else, that everybody else seemed to manage things and they couldn't. And it was just, they felt by the time they got to university, things got really difficult for them. So I was able to see, I felt so privileged, because I was kind of able to see what the future could be, and the things that I wanted to make sure were different for my son as he grew up. So that was one of the first times when I first started doing that job. At the time, I was still trying to keep everything kind of under wraps a little bit for my son. I wasn't really talking to him about what was going on. I was just making changes at home, doing things differently. They were all helping him, but I wasn't telling him what I was doing or why I was doing it. I was just trying to be very inclusive, and it was just, this is how we did things in our family. But when I started working with the students, I realised how important it was that he grew up understanding himself more and understanding what kinds of things were actually helpful to him, so that as he grew, he'd be able to say, actually, I could do with kind of a lot more written information about this, or actually I could really do with a quiet space to go and work in, or actually what I could do with. And I thought, no, and it changed my whole way of approaching things with him. So I started to talk to him in language that he could understand. Like, as I mentioned before, we talk about his busy brain, because it's just busy all of the time, and he just really struggles to keep up with everything that's going on. And he needs longer to just have a bit of time by himself and to just relax and recover after the school day or after a party or whatever it is. And so we started to talk about it more, and so he's able now to say, as I say, he's just turned 12, and there are times where he'll come and he'll say, Mum, I just need some time in the room by himself, or Mum, I need to go and get my ear defenders, everything's a bit noisy at the moment, or all of those kinds of things. So I felt really privileged to be able to kind of see what can happen in the future, and learn from the things that my students had found difficult themselves, and try and use that to help my son. So because people have different ideas about that, don't they? Some people have very strong ideas about, well, we don't tell our children, or we don't want our children to feel like they have a label or to feel different. But I think that they do feel different, and sometimes not really understanding what that difference is, and the fact that the difference is fine. It's not a bad difference, it's just a difference. I think that if we can help them to feel like that more in age appropriate ways, I'm not talking about telling them everything about the diagnosis, but in age appropriate ways, I personally feel that that's a nice way for our children to grow. So again, I help parents to kind of navigate that and think about how they feel about it and what they're comfortable with sharing, and what type of language they might use with their children to help them to understand little bits.
That makes absolute sense. And I feel like, being late diagnosed myself, I think the understanding is very important, and you being aware of it. But of course, there's ways of disclosing and dealing with your child when it gets to the time. In my case, for example, I at this point, because my daughter has the speech and language delay, and we do have conversations, but they are different conversations. I don't know if she has that understanding already. She understands everything that you tell her. So it can be a bit more challenging when there are communication difficulties.
Absolutely. And just every individual person is an individual person, isn't it? And I say all the time to parents that you are the expert for your child, and I can give you little bits of kind of theory and help you to understand what might be going on under the surface, but I am never going to tell you what to do with your child. I might make some suggestions about things that you can try, and then I will work with you to try and make that fit. Maybe if you say, well, I don't think that bit would work, and we can kind of reframe it, but we are experts with our own children. And when we can pause the meltdowns and finally get a little bit of clarity, when we talk about the invisible distress that our children have, there are actually, when we kind of tune into our children and connect with them more, often there are visible signs. There are things that we can see literally with our eyes, or we can pick up with our ears. There are actually sometimes some triggers. So, for example, my son gets very itchy. So I know when he starts to itch, or he'll start to move his hands in a particular way, I know where that's come from, because I've been able to go right back to basics and strip everything down. I've been able to pause, and I've been able to notice the signs. And so sometimes things actually do become very clear and almost visible when we know what it is that we're looking for.
Yeah. Okay, and this question is related to what we were talking about just now, because you support parents with children who may be diagnosed or in the pathway or not diagnosed at all. So why do you think early understanding is so important, and how does it make a difference?
Yeah, I think that for me, I always say, obviously, that diagnosis might be helpful for certain things. It might mean that we can get access to different supports through schools or the local authority or medical interventions, things like that. So diagnosis can be helpful in that way. But for me, diagnosis really is the least important part of the whole thing, because, diagnosis doesn't suddenly change everything. It doesn't change anything at all, in fact. So, it certainly doesn't come with a manual. So, especially when we talk about the autism diagnosis, it's literally, when you're diagnosed, you are literally discharged in the same meeting. So you're told, yes, your child is autistic. Now, bye-bye. It's literally a discharge. They tell you that they are discharging you because it's an assessment service. So it's literally then you're off on your own. So the diagnosis for me is far less important than the parent knowing that there is something different, because for such a long time, I just knew something was different. My son was just having these huge emotional outbursts for things that it was so disproportionate. So a tiny thing would happen and he would have this huge emotional response that it just didn't match the thing that had happened. And for such a long time, I was just like, I don't understand why this is happening. And of course, this is emotional regulation, and it's something that is a huge struggle because it all stems from the nervous system response. So I was saying, there's something different. And people around me were saying, no, he's fine. It's not. But I knew that there was something different. And so understanding as early as possible, it just helps us to maybe try some things. It maybe helps us to just help create that calm and connection earlier on, so that we don't get to the point where we are so set in our groundhog days of horrible experience that we don't get to that point. So some of the things that I do are really just trying to, I have a free masterclass which is called the 7 aha moments, to help parents to just think differently about the neurodivergent meltdowns, because I think that if you kind of start to become aware of some of the things that you can look out for actually that can trigger meltdowns, then you can start to think, oh right, there might be something going on here. Oh, this is happening, and so is this, and these are all kind of potential signs. So I think that the more we can be aware of, the earlier that we can be aware of them, I think it's helpful. And essentially everything we do that is neuroaffirmative, all of these neuroaffirmative practices, they are just, basically we call them trauma-informed practices. They are just leading with connection before correction. And so if your child isn't diagnosed or doesn't meet the diagnosis criteria, it's not that these techniques and strategies don't work with them. In fact, they are very likely to work with them. So understanding and trying to put things in place are really helpful. And plus, when it does come to, if you are seeking diagnosis or you're seeking some kind of educational healthcare plan, the more strategies that you can kind of show that you've tried this and if we can see that this is a challenge and this is a challenge, the more we can know, the more we've got to kind of report back on. So that can be helpful when we're dealing with schools, when we're dealing with local authorities or the NHS or whatever. Those kinds of things can be helpful. So the more information we have,
the better
prepared we are to deal with these things. But like I say, it's difficult sometimes to take on all of that information when we're just feeling so overwhelmed.
Yeah, so. Absolutely. And speaking about systems, what would a more inclusive and compassionate support system be for families? How do you feel that, or how do you think the systems could be better to support families with neurodivergent children? It's a hot topic.
A very big question. I probably won't be able to answer that one fully, but I think that I feel like the connection or the relationship between school and home is really, really key, because for so many of our children, school is where many of their challenges start to present, or many of these things start to really become difficult for them when they get to school. Many of our children will manage to get through the earlier stages of nursery and being at home and those kinds of things, but when they go into that school environment, things get really difficult. And so one of the things that I personally really want to support with is that the school's level of understanding, because as a teacher myself, I understand that we did have training. There was some elements of training, but they didn't prepare me for what I went through myself. And so I felt I feel very passionately that there is a lot more that I can do to help schools to understand more about these triggers, to help learning support assistants and classroom teachers to understand more about the hidden triggers of meltdowns, so that they can put more things in place during the school day to prevent the huge meltdowns that the child feels that they have when they get home, because that was certainly my experience. And being greeted at the school gate every single day, being told that he was fine, it would, the panic would rise in me at that moment, because I would think, if he's been fine in school, then I know I am in for a tough ride tonight. And I would beg. Sometimes I would literally, before I knew what I was doing, I'd be yelling in his face. I'd be saying, do this at school. Say these things to Miss. If you hate PE so much, say this to Miss. Stop saying it to me. And I would be begging him to just go and do this to somebody else, make somebody else feel the way he was making me feel. So for me, this idea that when we pick our children up from school, our learning support assistants or our classroom teachers are saying, oh, it's fine, he's had a great day. It's the worst thing that they can say, and it comes from a good place. They want to give us good news. They want to make us feel happy and proud of our children, but that's not how it feels when day in, day out, we know that that is not true. And if I can help schools to understand more around some of these hidden triggers, about how we can what emotional regulation looks like, around how we can help children to break down tasks to stop them being so overwhelmed, what sensory processing actually looks like for them, and how we can support our children more, then it might again have that impact. Well, it will have an impact on the children, but it will also have an impact on the family, because the child is more supported at school. So in terms of the bigger question that you said, there's so much more that can be done. The whole education system needs a complete overhaul. There are just so many children in classrooms. There is so much demand placed on children now. Back when I was going through my primary education, I wasn't having to do all of the things that they were having to do, and the pressure on the children now, and the pressure on the teachers now to get the children to do all of those things, it's just absolutely bonkers as far as I'm concerned. I managed to get through life and have quite a successful career, even despite the fact that I wasn't taught all what a prefronted adverbial etc was. I don't know what one is, and I've managed to get quite far in life. So I think that the things that are being expected of children much earlier on now, I don't think that's helping at all. I think that they're too overwhelmed too early, and so we're seeing the signs of this distress much earlier than perhaps we did in the past. So that's kind of a much bigger question to answer. But I think that I would like, and I feel like perhaps I can have a little bit of an impact on just that day-to-day school practice, and helping learning support assistants and teachers to just understand a little bit more about the experience that we go through as parents, and why sometimes we might be crying in the head teacher's office when we drop our child off, or why we might be getting a bit angry and frustrated on the phone because we don't know what's going on and we're so frustrated and we feel judgment from them. If I can help schools to understand more about our experience and more about what's happening to the children without them realising, then perhaps I can have a little bit of an impact with for neurodivergent families.
I'm sure you can. I'm sure you can. I think each of us making our small part, hopefully we'll have a better future. And if you were to give advice to any parents listening or watching who might be feeling overwhelmed or at a breaking point, what would you want them to hear?
That this is not your fault. It is not your fault, and things can get better. And I think that there's one real mindset shift that I kind of turned into a mantra really for me. And I suppose it really underpins what I do now and kind of underpins the pause method. And it is really, when our children are melting down and when we're seeing this behaviour in inverted commas that is making us so triggered, the mantra for me was, he is not giving me a hard time. He is having a hard time. And repeating that in my head when the moment of meltdown was happening really just helped me to move into that, how can I help him phase, as opposed to I'm going to be cross with him and this is all too much for me. So things can change. We need to do things differently. If we do things differently, we can change, and it all starts with that mindset shift that we can change. This is not about me. He's not doing this because he hates me, because he wants to ruin my day. He's doing it because he's having a hard time. And even if I don't know why he's having a hard time and I can't understand it and I can't see why it's happening, it is happening. So I can move forward differently if I accept that. So, so my message is, things can change, but they change when we change. And we need to be ready to just do something different. And that something different doesn't need to be to go back to university and learn everything there is to do about neurodivergence and special educational needs. It just needs to be some simple shifts that we can make to our lives that can help to calm the situation and help us to feel better.
Yeah, one step at a time, definitely. Thank you. Very helpful advice. And now moving on to your inner journey.
Oh gosh, I'm worried about these questions.
Which is the final part of the interview. So who is your biggest support on your journey?
I'd have to say that my husband is, because he's been there. He's there every day. He has a really tough job himself. He works in a secondary school, and it was really hard for him when things were really hard, because he was dealing with a lot of kind of challenges at school, and then he'd come home and it would be 10 times worse at home. But he's always been there, and he's been a real support. And I think that, not to get too deep with this question, but I think that in so many families there is a default parent, and that kind of everything, all of the learning and all of the changing falls to that parent. And often that parent then just feels even more overwhelmed, because they then have to start teaching their partner all of the things that they've learned. And so, there have been times where I've kind of had to be like, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it. But bless him, he has always gone along with what I've said. He's always let me lead, and he's kind of not quizzed me all the time. Why are we doing this? What? Yesterday we were doing something else. Now why are we doing this? And he's kind of supported me and said, okay, that's fine. We'll do it this way. Which has been really helpful to me. So he has been my biggest support. And then I do have a lovely support network, and I'm very, very, very lucky that my best friend from when I was age 3, she's actually a mental health care practitioner. So she has been a great person for me to come to and say, look, this is what's happening. Why is this happening? What is he doing? And so she's been able to, certainly in the early stages, she was able to explain things to me and kind of point me in the right direction of support that might be helpful for him and for me. So she's wonderful as well.
That's great. Yeah, I think with our partner or husband, it's very important that you are on the same page. And we all need a friend to, if they can be experts in any area that's helpful to us, that's great. And how do you treat yourself with regards to your well-being? Any hobbies, anything you do for yourself?
Yeah, I do try. And setting up a new business, as you well know, is very overwhelming in itself. So I'm finding myself at the moment with less time to do things. But I like to walk. I like to just go. We've got some lovely parks local to me. So I like to, whenever I'm able to, do the school run, and then I'll go and have a walk in the fresh air, walking around the park. That is something that I try as much as I can to fit into my routine. And for me, just recognising the signs of when things are becoming overwhelmed, that's a really important thing that I do for my well-being, just being mindful and kind of trying to nip things in the bud. If I feel like, right, I'm feeling very tired, or I'm feeling like I need to isolate myself, I'll kind of go, okay, what's happening? What is causing me this distress? Is there something that I can get rid of? I'm quite good at getting rid of things off my plate. I'm quite good at kind of going, that is not helpful to me. I do not need to put any of my energy into that particular thing at the moment, and trying to delete certain things off my to-do list. That's something that I feel quite strongly about.
I wish I was a bit more like that.
Yeah. I mean, I go through phases. Let's be honest here.
Yeah.
But yeah, I try and drink water, but even that sometimes goes out the window.
Yeah, you just forget about it, isn't it?
Yeah. When I was in the classroom and I was teaching all the time, I'd drink loads of water because I'd be talking all the time. But at the moment, it's not quite the same.
Yeah, it takes some time to get to embed drinking water into your new routine. So, yeah. And who is your biggest inspiration?
Goodness me, that is a really difficult question. My mum, I think, probably. She's, we talked about support before. She's a really big part of my support network. And she's just somebody who's dealt with an awful lot in her life, and she's dealt with it with such grace, and she's very calm. She's calmer than me. I think I've got a combination of hers and my dad's. My dad's a bit more energetic, and so I'm kind of in the middle, but she's very calm. And so there are so many times where I know that I need a little pep talk from my mum, and I'll phone her, I'll say, this is happening, you need to talk me down. And so she's a real inspiration. She's hardworking. She's got very strong values, and she has a lot of integrity. So she is somebody that I do aspire to be like. She works hard and she does the right thing for. She's very caring about other people, and these are the things that I want to be able to do. She does a good job of looking after people.
Yeah, and you are doing that too now. So that's. Yeah, I'm sure you are. You're not trying, you're doing it already. And if you were a superhero or had a superpower, who or what would that be? And how would you make it, or how would you use it to make the world a better place for the neurodivergent community?
Oh, a superpower. Probably. Wouldn't it be lovely if we could go and give people a little bit of perspective I think that would be a good superhero power, to be able to just go and have a little word with people before they make comments. So, you know, we feel judgment from people often who don't know anything about our situation, and they say things sometimes with good intention. They want to help us. They, you know, if there was a superhero power to just say in their ear, hang on, you know, have you thought about how you would feel if you hadn't slept all night, or if this is the 97th meltdown that you dealt with today? And they might just go, oh yeah, I hadn't thought about that. Because most people, they say things and they have opinions, and it's not because they're closed-minded or because they don't care about other people. It's because they just haven't thought about another person's perspective. So yeah, I mean, I don't know how that would ever work, but that'd be good, wouldn't it? If we could just make people think twice before they open their mouth.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm thinking about that idea of, you know, put yourself in someone else's shoes, which, you know, it might not work because we all have our own unique experiences. But maybe there should be some special shoes that you could give to people. So yeah, I love it. Yeah, that's a really good one. And music, I don't know if you consume music a lot, but is there a song that you feel like that captures your journey as a parent, or you know, as just yourself?
I don't think there is one single song, but there was a song that was trending on Instagram at the time where I was really kind of moving full time into sensory mother, and I was terrified about it. So I was leaving a stable and secure job and moving into this world of self-employment, and I was just absolutely terrified. And at the time, the Desiree song, you've got to be bad, you've got to be bolder, you've got to be wiser, hard, tough, stronger. And then in the end, she says, all I know, love will save the day. And I think that was really nice at that time. I was thinking, I feel so passionately about what I'm doing, and I feel so passionately about, you know, this all came from a place of me trying to pull my family back together. It was all about the love that I had for my child, even when it didn't feel like love, even when our home didn't feel like a safe place. Everything came from that place of me just wanting desperately to have this family where we all loved each other and we all felt safe with each other. And so I think that song, you know, as I say, it was trending at that time, and I was thinking, do you know what that is? I'm making a bold move here, but it's all because I just want to do things differently and I want to make a difference. And it all comes from that, just holding families together, because, you know, like I say, I'd like to think that I can help parents before they hit rock bottom. But the reality is that it often takes you hitting rock bottom before you even reach out for any help. So, yeah, it's all about pulling families together.
Yeah.
So maybe that's a good song.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect song, really. And if you had the chance to go back in time, what would you tell your younger self?
I would tell my younger self that any kind of plans that I was making or any ideas about what life was going to look like, they really didn't matter. You know, I've moved from secondary teaching into university teaching, and then I changed a completely different role in university. I had a family that didn't look anything like the family that I thought it was going to look like. And now I'm doing this. So I just think that there are so many I just thought I'd probably be a teacher for the rest of my life, and that would be it. And then I'd have this family where all my children were perfectly behaved and everything would be perfect. And it just doesn't work out that way, does it? Life happens. Like what John Lennon said, Liverpool reference, John Lennon said, life is what happens when you're busy making other plans. And that's true. Yeah,
definitely. And finally, if your heart had a voice, what would it tell us?
If my heart had a voice, it would tell us that the only thing that matters in life is that you have people around you that love you and that you love back. That it's about the people in our lives. And, you know, at the time where things were really difficult for us, and I thought I wasn't going to be able to work, I wasn't going to be able to go back to work. And in order for us to live in our home, we needed my income. And at that time, I just thought, you know what, we just have to go and live in a different house then. Because, you know, the things that we have in life are nowhere near as important as the people that we have in our life. So, you know, holding on to those material things or those material ideas, that's not what's important. I've forgotten what your question was. What would my heart tell us? My heart would say that love and being with people who love you and who you love, that is the most important thing. So the rest of the stuff just fits around that. And that's what we need to do. And that is definitely where Sensory Mother came from, because I hit the point where I thought that we were going to have to separate our family. And it's not an uncommon thought. Many parents come to me and say that that is what they're thinking, that they're thinking that they are going to have to separate their family because they can't live in the same house together, or their relationship with their child has become so bad that they can't live like this, and their relationship with their partner is suffering as a result. And so that's what my heart would say, that there is a way. If we love enough, there's a way to make things right. And if we all have to move into, you know, tents, then that's what we have to do, you know, because the people are more important.
Yeah, definitely. Love.
So hard.
I'm sorry. Great. Thank you so much, Laura. It was such a pleasure to meet you and hear all about your story, the Sensory Mother. And I'm looking forward to share the story with the audience, and also to stay in touch and, you know, potentially do some small collaborations, even though we live miles apart. But that would be great. So we'll definitely stay in touch.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
You're most welcome. Thank you. Thank you for listening or watching the Neurodiverse Voices podcast. If today's conversation resonated with you, please know that you are not alone. Your experience matters, your voice matters, and your way of being in the world is valid. I'm Andreia Costa, and this podcast exists to celebrate neurodivergent lives in all their complexity, strength, and individuality. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share it, and help these stories reach the people who may need them the most. Join me again next time for more honest conversations, powerful stories, and diverse perspectives, because every neurodivergent journey is different. And remember, when you meet one neurodivergent person, you've only met one neurodivergent person. Until next time, take care. Bye.